צהריים טובים. אני חושב שהסשן הבא הוא המשך של אותה הרוח של ההרצאות והדיונים המרתקים שהיו פה מהבוקר. הוא לא על רפואה כזה פרופר, הוא על הדברים שאנחנו חיים אותם באספקטים אחרים. אני חושב שכולנו מאז השנה הראשונה של למעשה ההתמחות חיים את המתח הזה בין העבודה הקלינית לבין הניסיון של שילוב עבודה של מחקר בסיסי או קליני. ואני רוצה להזמין את גיא להט לערער יחד איתנו על הדבר הזה.
Hi. So I'll move to English. I must admit that it's a bit strange for me to even to write this question or to ask this question in this meeting, because the essence of this meeting is the activity, the academic activity of the surgeons. And I think that especially after listening to all our guests yesterday and today and attending the parallel sessions, this question is even stranger to me, but I'm going to doubt that this academic meeting really represents our spirit as a society. And my disclosure is that I'm a surgeon and I also do clinical and translational research. So this is Professor Gidi Rechavi here? No. So in 2009, when I came back from my fellowship, I had a meeting with Professor Gidi Rechavi, and we sat for an hour and we discussed my plans, my future plans for an academic career in surgery. And he described me this imaginary triangle, and he told me that there are three vertices. And for our guests, you must understand that all of the people who attend this meeting, during the morning hours, we usually go to a university-affiliated hospital, which is a public hospital. I think we can call all of our public hospitals academic hospitals. And if we want to earn a decent salary, we have to go during and to work during all afternoon and sometimes late evening hours outside our hospitals. So this is the second vertex. And the third vertex was the academic career. And he told me, Guy, if you want my advice, you need to choose two out of these three vertices. So this was an excellent advice that Professor Rechavi gave me, and I chose to work in our hospital and to do an academic career. And you need to know a few more facts about the Israeli, let's say, I don't know if it is situation, but I think that this represents our society. I think that research fellowship in Israel is almost an obsolete. I don't know how many residents in this room even think about it as an option. I think that most MD PhD students, I don't have the numbers, but I believe this is true. Most MD PhD students do not choose surgery. And I truly feel that academic activity decreased. And I'm sure that if every one of you will ask the person who is sitting to the left of him, how many papers did you publish during the last year? How many papers did you write yourself, not as a collaborator? How many papers did you really write? The numbers won't be that large. And again, between the ages of 40 to 50, there are fewer professors than used to be 20 years ago. And I don't know if any one of these professors is in the non-clinical tract. And money is a big barrier, and it is the easiest barrier to talk about, and it is also something that you can measure. So yes, it is true. Surgeons get less funding for research, we get less money than internal medicine departments. And therefore, we submit less abstracts, and we present less papers in scientific meetings. And this is, by the way, I took it from the ISF site, the Israeli Scientific Foundation. Scientists who work in the hospitals get less than 5% of the funds which are awarded by the ISF. And you may say that, okay, only 5% of the scientists are working in the hospital. But it means that many of us have to compete on these grants against fully trained and full-time scientists. And I have a question for the audience. And really, how many people in this room can read these data? Can you raise your hands, please? Okay. Now, how many people in this room know what is wrong with the captions that I wrote here? How many of you think that surgeons should know how? Anyone? So, Dr. Drebin, maybe I should step down. And I want to remember you, to remind you, how did it all start? We were just like the barbers and the butchers, and it was, this is from the 19th century. And for those of you who cannot tell the difference, these are the barbers and these are the surgeons. And it all changed towards the end of the 19th century by Halsted. He made a really immense contribution to surgery. He's the father of the modern residency program, and he also contributed to various fields: sterile procedures, surgical gloves, careful handling of tissues, and local anesthesia. And I think that thanks to Halsted, we can all consider ourselves as educated and knowledgeable surgeons. But what about the academic surgeon? And this creature did not exist until the end of the 19th century. And listen to what Halsted said and wrote. After all, the hospital, the operating rooms, and the wards should be laboratories of the highest order. And we know from experience that where this conception prevails, not only is the cause of higher education and medical science best served, but also the welfare of the patient is best promoted. It remains with the teachers of medicine and surgery to make them so. More from Halsted. The surgeon, educator, researcher is the ideal surgeon. He represents the best chance for obtaining the best results. He is the hope of the future for advancing surgery with better patient care. And he serves as a constant stimulus to others. His words, not mine. Let's go over the missions of the academic surgeon. His clinical mission is to operate on patients. He needs to take care of these patients. He has a busy outpatient clinic. He has a teaching mission, and of course he has his research mission. It is clinical, and sometimes it is translational or even higher basic science research. And what does it mean? It means that you have to establish a lab, to run it, to generate novel research ideas, produce data, recruit money, guide students and researchers, publish, present in scientific meetings, create scientific collaborations. That's a lot of things to do. So my first question to you, Dr. Drebin, is do you think that Halsted is the perfect role model for the academic surgeon? Because we know that Halsted was competitive and mostly obsessed with surgery and science. Halsted was a drug addict through most of his career. Halsted had no family. He got married, but he had no children. And you may say that his research was surgical or maybe technical. It was very practical. אתה עוזר לי? זה יצא לי, זה הגיע אוקיי, זה כנראה רק אצלי. טוב, אצלי השתנתה הצוגה. So, if Halsted is not our role model, what about these 9 surgeons? Do you know what they share in common? Okay, so all of these surgeons won a Nobel Prize in medicine. And maybe, you know, this is a room full of surgeons. Most of us are real machos. So maybe if these are not our role models, so maybe he is a better role model for us. And listen to what he says.
Man's got to know his limitations.
So, and I want to remind you, why did we become surgeons? We want to operate on our patients. We are active, sometimes restless. We enjoy facing danger, walking on the edge. We are thrilled by fighting death in the OR. We save lives. We control the mission. We are the captain of the ship. We have fun, and surgery is fun. This is what I always tell to my friends. And we love the art and craft of surgery. What does it have to do with the classical lab environment? Nothing. And this is a questionnaire that you can find in the American College of Surgeons site. It has several questions. It is for students who ask themselves, do I fit to surgery? Am I a future surgeon? And it says that if you answer yes on these questions, or at least on most of these questions, then you are fit. You might be a good surgeon. And again, no research here. Intellectual challenge is not mentioned. So, second question for you. Maybe we have a different personality. Maybe we don't have the right personality to become scientists. Maybe we are not qualified to become scientists. But I guess that we prefer to think that we are very capable, and maybe the only thing is that we don't have the time. We have a long line of past and future patients. We need to take care of them. The emergency department calls us. Moti mentioned the very busy life of his residents, and our time. And who taught us that volume equals quality? The academic surgeons. And I must tell you that research is equally demanding, and well-funded research is a full-time job. What about contribution and impact? I sit with the students every 2 months for an hour, and we talk about academic surgery and the importance of being an academic physician, because they are students, they are not even interns. And usually, these are the answers that they give me. The academic surgeon can ask the relevant questions for his profession. He can bring knowledge of biological mechanisms to the laboratory and ultimately to the patient. The surgeon can collect and utilize human tissue. It's very easy for us. And I'm sure that all of you agree that clinical studies are crucial to improve outcomes and advance any specialty or subspecialty. And another thing that you get with research, you get international recognition. But really, let's see. How many papers really make an impact? How many surgeons in your department, each of you here, significantly contributed and or changed their specialty in their whole career? One paper that made the difference. How many wrote their papers out of curiosity? How many did it just for writing? And just for comparison, how many made an impact in the OR? How many of you feel that they made an impact in the OR only this week? I'm sure that most of you. What about reward and prestige? And I'll start with reward. Surgery, with surgery we get quick results, immediate reward, and we feel satisfied. It is very complex, but we feel satisfied. And with surgery you can always earn money. What about research? Very slow process until you get the data. What about reward? You get a line in the CV, that's right. You get to participate in society meetings, and you get recognition. What about the last one? This one seems to be important. Clinical promotion. How many of you want me to take it off the list? But it's there. What about, have you ever heard it? There are surgeons, and there are academic surgeons. I first heard it in my first year as a resident. Moti is smiling. And you know, I did a small experiment. I took it to my family. I asked my wife and children, who is the better surgeon? The surgeon or the academic surgeon? They had the same answer, the surgeon. And this is why you all buy tanur, because it already works. But I truly believe that both reward and prestige are in the eyes of the beholder, so I believe that some people take it differently. So is clinical promotion our main incentive, and is it right? Look at the requirements from a leader in Hopkins. The division chief shall serve as the leader of his or her respective business unit in addition to fulfilling all clinical research and academic programmatic goals as set forth in the letter of employment. Provide guidance and oversight of research. Undertake a systemic review of the research enterprise of the business unit and develop a plan to enhance and expand research operations. What do you think about leadership in surgery without academic activity? What do you think about such leadership in medicine? This is a paper that was published from India. Mandatory publication in India. Setting quotas for research output could encourage scientific fraud. So in India, 60% of the country's medical institutions have not published any research in a decade. This led the Medical Council of India to update its guidance to require at least 4 research publications to attain a post of associate professor and 8 for the post of a professor. These are the retraction rates in the scientific literature. Look at the increase, it's unbelievable. And there are various reasons, and believe me, none of the reasons in this table, almost none, is acceptable. And we are all familiar with the predator journals and fake news. So another 2 questions. Maybe non-academic leaders will be able to inspire, guide, and support potential academic surgeons. What do you think about that? And tell me, please, what is the exact added value of scientific activity to medical or surgical leadership? I would love to hear it. And last, maybe we've gone too far with our evolution as surgeons. And maybe we need to get a few steps back to stand still as surgeons. And I want to offer you all a potential model for the future surgeon. Maybe instead of Halsted's model. He's called the expert surgeon. And according to this model, surgeons should be knowledgeable and skillful. They should teach and inspire the next generation of surgeons. They should be involved in the development of technical, surgical novelties. They may contribute as collaborators to clinical and especially to scientific research. And last but not least, in this model, all academic activity will be detached from clinical promotion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Dr. Reuven Rabinovich asked me to present the lecture about his father that he sent to me, and I will just present it to you. Professor Natan Rabinovich actually was one of the founders of surgery in Israel, and he was a house officer in Hadassah in 1942 under Felix Mandel, and then he had a fellowship at BI in Boston under Jacob Fine and Owen Wangenstein, and afterwards he became chief of surgery B at Hadassah from 1962 to 1978. His surgical philosophy was to combine clinical practice and research, never take things for granted. He established academic surgery in Israel. He had the first surgical laboratory in Hadassah, and he established academic surgery in Israel, and his first publications appeared actually in 1946 with Felix Mandel, and and then later on in 1952 in the Annals of Surgery with Jacob Fine, and then another paper in surgery. All these papers were actually, he was a chief author on these papers. He also pioneered clinical surgery in Israel. He has performed the first Whipple's operation in 1952. He had a large practice, magnet for referrals, and the generations of Israeli surgeons which he raised were Professor we have here. These were his pupils. We see here Professor Durst, Professor Ronnie Rosin, Professor Vishnitzer, and Professor Feuchtwanger, and then the younger students were Uri Freund, Reuven Pfefferman, I myself, Yaki Berlatsky, and Yona Mani. Professor Natan Rabinovich, he participated in all the several wars and cared for many combat and terror victims. In 2007, the Natan Rabilovici started by a donation by that family with Bill Schechter in 2007, Tom Scalia in 2009, and L.D. Britt in 2011, John Holcroft 2013, and Paul Sugarbaker in 1915. And now here we have Jeffrey Drebin, who actually will present the lecture today.
Thank you. It's truly a great honor to be here, and I want to thank Guy for a great opening. I think only a true academic surgeon could have put together such a wonderful, well-researched, well-thought-out, hypothesis-driven presentation. And although his head was in it, you could tell his heart wasn't in it. And so I think my task is not so hard. I'm going to talk about the positive side of academic surgery. And I want to thank Yossi and Moti for the opportunity to be here. Earlier in the week, I had the chance to go to the wall. And I was last there over 40 years ago when I was a teenager. And so I thought about my life. I thought about what I would have thought at 16 about the way my life has evolved. And after saying a prayer of thanks for my family, I also thought about my career and my life as an academic surgeon. So I'm going to tell you that that's part of me, and I hope I can communicate some of my enthusiasm for that career path. Academic medicine is the branch of medicine pursued by doctors who engage in a variety of scholarly activities, and academic surgery really talks about surgeons who do scholarly work, teach, and deliver clinical care. There are a number of challenges, and Guy has presented those very well. I'll point out some that I think are on really both sides of the Atlantic, but also talk about opportunities and my view on the importance of the academic surgeon. So the tripart mission of research, clinical care, and education has traditionally stood on three pillars of support, each of which, I think in both of our countries, is under attack. The relative ease of research funding, generous clinical reimbursements, and the fact that we had house staff who were available around the clock to do whatever was needed, and teaching was defined as whatever we wanted them to do. And so performing whatever tasks or spending time with us was all we had to do, and that was educational. So why should surgeons perform research? Disrespecting surgical research is nothing new, and this is actually an excerpt which didn't come through well on the slide. I apologize. But it's an excerpt from a Lancet article in 1996 in which they talk about whether surgical research is actually more of a crazy house, and that simply citing our cases is really nothing that should be considered research. And that was quoting an article from 1923. So this has been going on for 100 years and more, almost from the time of Halsted. Now, being a researcher doesn't necessarily impress your patients, and I think this comes to Guy's comment about surgeons and academic surgeons. And it's hard to read the quote, but the quote is, "Sure, he's scared. You'd be scared too if I were your surgeon." So telling patients that you just got a big research grant doesn't necessarily inspire their confidence. Similarly, being a busy surgeon doesn't necessarily earn you much credit in the academic community in which many of our hospitals are embedded. And it's been said that surgeons that perform laboratory research are like talking dogs. They need not do it well. It's a wonder that they can do it at all. Now, I'm not here to tell you that research is all rainbows and sunshine and wonderful. NIH awards are at best flat and are actually declining when adjusted for inflation, as shown here. Obtaining grant funding is increasingly challenging. This shows back in the 1960s, it was possible to get, grants were funded 60% of the time. Now it's actually, this only goes through 2007 when the pay line was 20% after the so-called doubling of the NIH budget. Now it's around 10%. So NIH funding is really challenging. And that was before the most recent federal U.S. Government budget proposal by our president, who wants to make America first by cutting the NIH budget by 18%. And you can see the impact here in current and constant dollars of the proposed effects on the NIH. So in terms of research funding, I certainly agree with Guy, it's a challenge. Clinical revenue is also a problem. Healthcare expenditures in the US are accelerating, I think, more than anywhere else in the world, and it's unsustainable. And so the money that drives our hospitals, drives our clinical revenue, is certainly going to be threatened. And it's worth noting that academic surgeons, as shown on the top line here, are relatively poorly compensated, although I will show later, still pretty well compensated, when compared to surgeons in other aspects of work. Now, luckily, we might be able to call on the house staff to come rescue us, but unfortunately that's no longer an option. The house staff no longer can be in the operating room alone. We have to have the attendings present for surgery. They can only work a limited number of hours. There's a requirement for structured teaching and curricula. There's a restriction on patient care activities that are defined as service, not education. I know Moti in his talk before talked about how nurse practitioners may help bridge that gap. The things that we did for patients, which were often not professional, are no longer allowed for the residents. And there are also potential reductions in the US on federal government support to hospitals to pay for residents. So the house staff are not going to rescue the academic surgeon. Now we talked about stress and burnout, and this was an article from Charlie Balch and Julie Freischlag that was published in Archives of Surgery. It lists a number of causes of physician burnout, and a number of these are highly linked to being an academic surgeon. The length of training and delayed gratification, the long work hours and enormous workloads. If you're going to try to be a successful surgeon and a researcher, it's going to take more time. Insufficient protected time for research as well as funding. And finally, perhaps the bottom line, and maybe this is the fundamental of Guy's argument, setting unrealistic goals or having them imposed on oneself. So these are all challenges. And in fact, for many academic surgeons, as shown in this cartoon, they can say, I can't remember, do I work at home or do I live at work? So academic surgery right now faces a perfect storm, and for those who've seen the movie or read the book, this refers to a weather condition that came up on the Atlantic, which resulted in record waves and ultimately led to the sinking of a boat. But with fixed and shrinking clinical care reimbursements, NIH funding cuts, and limitations on house staff, how can we, academic surgeons, weather this storm? So is academic surgery still a rational career choice? You bet. Why should surgeons perform research? I'm going to read you a quote from Judah Folkman, the great father of the study of tumor angiogenesis. Talk about someone who impacted a whole field of science. And the quote is, as long as there is an unconquered disease, an injury that cannot be repaired, or a method of prevention that remains beyond reach, we have an obligation to conduct research. Research represents hope, and for many patients and families, hope is the best thing we have to offer. We pursue investigations so that one day we can offer health. If we think about the topics for research by surgeons, they deal with all the major illnesses, or most of the major illnesses of mankind. And I want to emphasize, when I talk about surgeons doing research, it's not just surgical technique. It's studying the fundamental aspects and the applied and translational aspects of all these different diseases, all of which find themselves in the domain of the surgeon. Now, we can ask ourselves, do we want to do the hard work all day long, as shown by the clinical surgeons over there on the left-hand side, who you can see are rolling the cart with the square wheels, Or do we want to figure out what the problem is and try to fix it, as shown by the academic surgeon on the other side? Again, when I talk about surgical research, it can really run the gamut from basic bench research to translational work, clinical, and even health services research. And health services research is an important area, particularly in our country where the budgets are exploding to find ways to do more with less. And I found this great little table. It's sort of like, for those interested in health services research, this is almost like the menu in a Chinese restaurant where you get to pick one from the appetizer column and one from the second course column. So health services research is a multidisciplinary field of investigation that studies how, and you pick one of these things in the first column, like social factors, effect, and you pick one in the second column, the cost of health care in populations. And there's your project. So you can, it's why so many of our residents, I think, are attracted to health services research. But I still think there's a role for fundamental basic science by surgeons as well. Now, although I showed you how terrible the NIH budget proposal that President Trump came up with, I'm happy to say that our government is not run by the president. And the Congress approves the budget, and the Congress just approved a $2 billion, 6% increase in the NIH budget for next year. So although it's still competitive, it's nowhere near as dire as if it had followed President Trump's recommendation. And I can show you an example. When we look at surgery departments in the US, this was the month that I left the University of Pennsylvania after being chairman for 8 years. And what you can see is the Blue Ridge Institute rankings of the best NIH-funded departments of surgery in the US. And I'm proud to say the University of Pennsylvania sits at the top of the list. And I should emphasize, there was one PhD member of the faculty. Everyone else were surgeon scientists who were, with appropriate mentorship and support, able to compete for NIH funding and are doing useful and important work. In addition, there are other sources of funding: industry, federal agencies, and private foundations. The work I presented yesterday was funded by Stand Up to Cancer. I should also point out that as much as academic surgeons like to complain about their incomes, surgeons are still very well compensated. I'm sorry this doesn't show very well, but it shows that among health professions, surgeons are actually second only to anesthesiologists, who clearly are the smartest ones, in their incomes. And certainly compared to a variety of other professions, engineers, finance managers, architects, we still do quite well. And finally, our legacy. And like stones thrown into a pond, what we do ripples out from our own practices and our own efforts in academic surgery across the nation. There was a great paper that just came out. I have to admit I'm somewhat biased. This was published just this month in the Annals of Surgery, and it talks about the impact of John Cameron, who was my chairman of surgery when I trained at Johns Hopkins. And what they did was evaluate, they called it the legacy factor, and again, it's blurry and I apologize. They looked at all the people he trained who went on to become chairs or program directors. And then they said, okay, that's the first round of the circle. How many did they train? And so, for example, I think I'm in there for 56 that trained with me during my 8 years of chair at Penn. It's over 1,000 surgeons, and the map of the US shows all the different spots, and the size of the circles are the number of trainees at those institutions. So again, our opportunity to not just help our patients, to not just impact our understanding of disease, but to really help mold the next generation is one of the critical missions of the academic surgeon. This was a lecture that Eva Singletary gave at the Society of Surgical Oncology, what being a good mentor means. And I think it talks through a lot of the challenges we face in trying to mentor the next generation. And there's some very simple advice: to listen, to support and facilitate, to teach by example, encourage and motivate, to promote independence and give everyone their chance, to promote balance. And maybe this is the area that I think many of us in the room fall a little short of in our own lives, are fairly often not well balanced. I suspect my wife and your wife would feel the same way. To rejoice in the success of their mentees. because again, these are our progeny. And finally, a comment that I completely agree with Guy, to convey joy, the joy that they find in their work that's apparent, should be apparent to everyone around them. And I say the same thing you do. I'm a surgeon because it's fun, and I'm an academic surgeon because it's even more fun. So the importance of the academic surgeon, it has to be something you enjoy, and it's important to recognize a good department should have a significant academic component, but not everyone can be an academic surgeon. You need to have people who are surgeons, you need to have great teachers who don't do research, but the portfolio of the department altogether should include research, and to do this you need both excellent clinical training and excellent research training. You need a supportive environment, particularly when starting out, and if you're successful, leadership and administrative opportunities will come perhaps too quickly, and you may want to get training in those areas as well. And finally, a saying that I think all surgeons, and particularly Israeli surgeons, understand. I'm not telling you it's going to be easy, I'm telling you it's going to be worth it. So I want to thank you very much for the honor of presenting today, and thank you.